Hello, I am Cheryl Sanders, and I'm moderator of the workshop 7, What Reparations Would Look Like in Support of Low Income Households. Economic reparation for Black Americans continues to be a topic discussed in the news, in communities, and across all levels of government. This workshop will include a discussion by leaders at the national and local level who are taking steps to address or redress serious violations of human rights or humanitarian law through reparations in the form of compensation to victims of these violations or laws. There will also be a discussion this afternoon of a pilot program to address the needs of the working poor or low income households. I am, as I said, Cheryl Sanders. I am pastor of Third Street Church of God in Washington, D.C., and also I am professor of Christian ethics at Howard University School of Divinity. I want to give you a brief introduction to our panelists today, each of whom is very well informed on this compelling and timely topic of reparations and economic disparities. I'll begin with Mayor Daniel Biss, who is mayor of Evanston, Illinois. He began his career as a mathematics professor at the University of Chicago before becoming an organizer and then an elected official. He served as a member of the Illinois House and Illinois Senate and ran an insurgent grassroots campaign for the Democratic nomination for governor, coming in second in a crowded field. His campaigns and legislative service have all featured a strong commitment to public engagement, political reform, and economic justice. Our second presenter is Ms. Ebony Davis, who is Associate for Programming and Historical Research for Reparations at Virginia Theological Seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. She holds an MA in Museum Studies and Historical Preservation from Morgan State University and is currently pursuing her PhD in African Diaspora History at Howard University. For nearly 15 years, Ms. Davis has operated within the field of public history, working for local, state, and national institutions in the United States and Africa. Ms. Davis is currently responsible for coordinating the research efforts of the seminary's recently initiated reparations program and liaising with the program's descendant families. Next is Ms. Kate Garvey, who is director of the Department of Community and Human Services for the City of Alexandria, Virginia. DCHS is a unified department that is focused on the safety, well-being, and economic security of residents. It provides child welfare, economic supports, behavioral health, workforce, developmental disability, early childhood, housing, domestic violence, and aging services to more than 25,000 residents each year. Prior to her work in Alexandria, Ms. Garvey served as Chief of Children, Youth, and Family Services of the Montgomery County, Maryland Department of Health and Human Services for more than 10 years. Our fourth presenter is Dr. Ron Daniels, who is founder and president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, a progressive, African-centered, action-oriented resource center dedicated to empowering people of African descent and marginalized communities. As administrator for the National African American Reparations Commission, the Institute of the Black World has emerged as a leading organization within the United States and global reparations movements. The NAARC has devised a 10-point reparations program and is a staunch supporter of H.R. 40, the congressional bill that would establish a national commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans. Dr. Daniels serves as the convener of NAARC. As we begin our presentation, We will invite questions from the audience. It would be good if you would put those questions in the chat. And we're going to begin with Mayor Biss. Each of our presenters, we're asking to frame your presentation within 15 minutes. Thank you. Mayor Biss.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to participate in this panel. As was said, my name is Daniel Biss. I'm the mayor of Evanston, Illinois. We're a community of about 75,000 people just north of Chicago, along the lakefront, Lake Michigan. And before I even begin, I want to be clear about one thing. I've been the mayor of our community since May 10th, and I'm enormously proud of the work that we're doing as a path-breaking municipality on reparations issues. But this work was initiated long before I became the mayor, and I don't want to give the false impression that I deserve much of the credit for it. In fact, we had a member of our city council, a woman by the name of Robin Rue Simmons, who really spearheaded this work and has been a visionary leader for our community. And I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of where the credit really belongs here. But I thought I would take my time just to share what the city of Evanston has been doing on this issue and why. Like a lot of places, we are a place that has been talking about reparations for a long time. We're a diverse community. We're a community with a long-standing history of a really culturally rich and itself very, very diverse African-American community, and one that has been, frankly, very segregated. And that segregation is not only geographical, but it's been segregation of opportunity. To give the most extreme example, today we have 9 wards in the city of Evanston and 8 neighborhood elementary schools in 8 of those 9 wards. And the ward that does not have its own neighborhood school is the ward that is the historically African-American ward. And so when it comes to educational opportunity, when it comes to health outcomes, when it comes to economic opportunity, when it comes to safety, the segregation that has existed in our community has led, like in pretty much everywhere else in this country, to a variety of other truly vicious inequities. And so we've kind of talked around the question of reparations for a long time. Is this something we ought to do? Is this something we have an obligation to do? How would we do it? And in recent years, we've taken steps to actually begin to do that work. That began in part with a historical study. There was a historical study that was done by some local scholars and archivists that really examined the question of what was the city of Evanston's role in segregation and the various consequences of racial segregation. And what was discovered there, which again is not going to be surprising to almost anybody, is that for a very long period of time, in fact, between the years of 1919 and 1969, so for a full half century, the city of Evanston, through its own policies, was enforcing segregation, was supporting restrictive covenants and redlining and other acts by racist homeowners associations and realtor groups and financial institutions and so forth. Not just did that stuff kind of happen, but the city of Evanston itself, through the way it functioned as a government, supported those acts that enforced segregation and then created these other massive inequities in our community. And once that research was done and published and agreed upon, then people began to say, well, now hold on. There's not just institutional racism in a theoretical sense. There's not just inequity in the world. We, the city of Evanston, our institution, in concrete and measurable ways perpetuated this harm, and therefore we owe a debt. We have a moral responsibility to repay that debt. And that historical study really shifted the conversation from, hey, is this something that we ought to maybe think about doing, to, wait a second, this is something that we owe, a debt that we owe. And so I think that initial observation is really important to make. The This is not an effort by a small town in Illinois to by itself repair the harm that was done by the great American crime of slavery. This is not an effort by a single town to repair the various awful consequences of institutional racism in our country or even in our community, but it is an effort to acknowledge we ourselves perpetrated part of this harm, and we want to acknowledge that. And the only honest way to acknowledge it is to begin to seek to repair that harm. So then the question became, okay, so that principle is out there, but what do we do and how do we do it? And by the way, how might we pay for it? And the next kind of honestly stroke of luck was that as these conversations were ongoing, the state of Illinois legalized the recreational use of cannabis. And well, now that cannabis is legal, it's taxed at the local level. And so that provides a revenue stream to local governments that did not exist before. And so rather than having to get mixed up in the budget conversation of, okay, we need to find X dollars for reparations, and so we better take them from somewhere else, and then how do you decide where to take them from? Instead, there was an opportunity to say, there's a new revenue stream coming to our local government. By the way, that revenue stream is arriving because of the reversal of a policy that I believe was a racist policy, because the way in which the war on drugs was prosecuted was not had enormous, and I would argue deliberate, disparities. And so the ending of the prohibition on cannabis is the ending of a racist policy. And so then it made sense, many people felt, that the tax revenue that is coming to the city as a consequence of the reversal of that racist policy ought to be used to repair the harm that the city itself had perpetrated. So now we have the idea that, all right, we owe our African American residents a debt because of the role that we played in perpetuating segregation, and also we have a revenue stream that we're going to devote to that. And so an ordinance was passed that earmarked the first $10 million that will come in cannabis taxes to a new reparations fund. And then the final and arguably most difficult question of all is, what do you do with the reparations fund? Who is eligible and what do they get? And this is a live conversation in our community. There's still a lot of discussion about it. I would say there is not consensus, and people are still working their way through different proposals. But a decision was made about the first initial allocation from the reparations fund. And so I mentioned a minute ago that a commitment was made that the first $10 million that are brought into the city from the sales tax on cannabis will go into the reparations fund. Of that eventual $10 million, the first 4%, or the first 400,000, has now been allocated. And that 400,000 has been allocated in the following way. What the designers of the program said was, because the most concrete example of harm perpetrated by the city government that has been documented was in the area of housing, it's appropriate for the repair work to be done also in the area of housing. And so the idea was that the reparations fund can be utilized as essentially a down payment on a home, or to engage in some renovation or rehab of a home. And so that initial $400,000 is going to be given out in 16 grants of $25,000 each. And the application process is open, is actually just closed. And in order to apply, you had to essentially fall into one of a few different categories. You could either yourself be a current African-American Evanstonian who also resided in Evanston during the course of that time between 1919 and 1969, when the city was involved in enforcing segregation. Or you could be a current African-American Evanston resident who is a descendant of someone in that situation. So you need not have been alive before 1969, but you can also be a child or grandchild of somebody who was. And so that program was announced, and there was a lot of discussion, and applications came in, and applications have enormously exceeded the amount of funding that's available. And so the question then that's going to come before first the Reparations Committee and then the City Council is, Okay, now what? We've spent 4% of the money. We set up a program that was massively oversubscribed. There were many, many, many more people who were not only applied, but were found eligible than there were resources to support them. So do we just open that program up to more people because almost all of the fund is unspent? Or do we instead try to spend other aspects of the fund in a different way? Because, for example, one point that someone might make is not everyone is a homeowner. Not everyone is seeking to become a homeowner. There are lots of individuals who were themselves harmed by these policies, whose harm we're trying to repair, who might not be eligible for this program. And so there's a lot of discussion here in town about these basic questions of program design. How do you stand something up in a way that it will be functional, it will be fair, it will be broadly applicable to the community that has been harmed? And then finally, how do you do it in a way that will be legally defensible? Because in addition to all the other questions, before this was even passed, before the city council even took their initial vote to authorize this $400,000 program, we already had threatening letters from national organizations promising that they were going to bring a lawsuit. They were going to declare this to be a civil rights violation of some kind and take us to court. And so as we are trying to figure out what is the just way to design a program, what is the way that is most responsive to public input, what is the way that meets the needs of the community, and what is the way that actually ultimately repairs the harm, we're also trying to ensure that we put something together that will withstand legal challenge, which we know is coming. And so I want to close by saying, ultimately, I've talked about a million different specific things about redlining and a grant for housing and cannabis, but ultimately, the problem that we're trying to solve here is very simple, which is that there are massive, persistent inequities in Evanston today based upon race. Inequities in wealth, inequities in income, inequities in health and educational outcomes, and more. And what we have finally come to acknowledge, which I think is a really, really important step, is we've said city government played a concrete, tangible role in creating a world that built those outcomes. Those inequities are not only not an accident, but we, the city of Evanston, is one of the factors that contributed to that outcome. And by the way, we did it on purpose. We did it on purpose. We did what we could to segregate our city. And I think by acknowledging that fundamentally immoral past, we name our responsibility in fixing the present. And the journey that we're going through and figuring out the best way to design a reparations program is simply a part of the larger mission of creating a truly equitable community, one where there are not racial disparities in all of these various factors, and one where every Evanstonian has an equal opportunity to thrive. And so it's been a remarkable process so far. Certainly the majority of the work lies ahead, but I'm honored to have a chance to talk about it and share with you some of what we're doing and what we've learned, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the discussion this afternoon.
Hello. Again, I am Ebony Davis, and I am the Associate for Programming and Historical Research for Reparations at Virginia Theological Seminary. I'm going to share with you a bit about our program, our reparations program that was announced a couple of years ago now, in September of 2019. The seminary announced the creation of a reparations endowment fund with the intent to research and recognize the experiences of Black people who toiled under the oppression of VTS and during slavery and during Jim Crow. The endowment fund is fully funded by the seminary as part of its commitment to recognizing the racism in its past and working towards healing in its future. So since that announcement 2 years ago, the fund has increased from $1.7 million to $2.2 million, and there have been additional funds allocated to support the work of African American congregations that have historical ties to the seminary, to create programs that promote justice and inclusion within the seminary community, and to elevate the overall work and voices of African American alumni and clergy within the Episcopal Church, especially at Black congregations that are connected to the seminary. So our reparations program is a twofold initiative that includes a research team comprised of historical and genealogical experts, and an implementation effort comprised of the Office of Multicultural Ministries, which is the office that I work in here at the seminary, and our reparations subcommittee. The research team is tasked with gathering historical documentations of Black people who labored at VTS during slavery and or Jim Crow, and with conducting genealogical research to find living descendants. So the way our research process works is we have one team working on the Jim Crow side with the local Black community here in Alexandria that goes back, they have very strong ties to this area that go back generations. So we're working with the living community, doing oral history interviews, trying to identify all of the descendants who live in this area and have guaranteed ties to the seminary. And then we're tracing their history back in time as far as we can go. Then we have our other side of the research team that is working with institutional records and other records and archives, trying to identify individuals who were enslaved at the seminary and then do the genealogy forward in time so that we can hopefully meet somewhere in the middle with the research. On the flip side of that, we have our implementation effort, which is tasked with the overall administration of our program, which includes probably the most important part outside of the actual cash payments for the institution is to foster relationships with the descendant families and to assess their needs and desires as beneficiaries, or what we would call shareholders, in our program. We also manage the seminary's commitment to the other aspects of the reparations program, specifically our grant program, and then do a continual audit, if you will, of our program's policies, just to check in and see what's working, what's not working. And that's an inclusive process with the institution, the leadership, and with the descendant community as well. So in essence, at this stage in our program, we're doing three main things: the research and identification of the institution's role in slavery and segregation. We're trying to identify individuals for the purpose of making annual cash payments to the direct descendants of Black people who worked here or were enslaved at the seminary between its founding in 1823 and its integration in 1951. And I say integration because technically that was when the first African-American student was admitted, but there's a longer, more detailed story, or even around that one instance. We respectfully refer to those direct descendants that are a part of our program as our shareholders, and they are the members of the generation of each family that is the closest to the enslaved person or the Jim Crow era employee that still has at least one living family member. So far to date, we have made 21 payments to members of 7 different families in Alexandria, Black families in Alexandria. All of them are descendants of individuals who worked at the seminary during the Jim Crow era. And it was important for the seminary to acknowledge the experience of the Black people who worked here during that time, because not only did they get paid much less than their white counterparts, but they also had a less than ideal experience. So just because they were not enslaved by this institution, it is very clear that we make note that their life was not ideal, and the payments that they are receiving is with the understanding that their estate and the wages that were due to their estate were lost. And so with this fund, we hope to begin to restore that. But even more so, we hope to begin to build a new relationship with the local Black community, because the seminary for generations has had a very poor relationship with the Black community that has sustained and built this institution, which will soon be celebrating its 200th year of existence. Along the same lines of that, we are working diligently trying to identify individuals who were enslaved by the seminary. Our research on the antebellum side has yielded dozens of names so far, and we have a lot of leads, one of which we recently discovered was an individual who was enslaved at the seminary and escaped via the Underground Railroad and recorded his entire account when he made it to Philadelphia and then eventually into Canada. And so we have different leads like that are giving us a lot of information that we can then follow up on. And hopefully within the next year, we'll be able to have all of that and start to find living descendants of all of those individuals on our list from the antebellum period. And then the second big part of our work is building relationships with the community. It's the priority. We believe that the reparations and the cash payment is something that just needs to happen. There's no question about that. The seminary is not under any kind of illusion that they were not complicit in the institution of slavery. This is Virginia. And so, the institution, the leadership just made the decision, we are going to use this fund and pay reparations from it. We didn't need to do any kind of research in advance because it was already understood that we were complicit. And so now as we are doing the research, it is just backing up what we already knew with the proper records and evidence. And as an independent institution, that's this kind of very top down, it's a lot easier to do this type of work when the leadership just makes the call and then tells you to go forth. And so in prioritizing the payments, the next priority is the relationship with the community, with an understanding that the debt can only be paid so much because, it's one thing to write a check and then wipe your hands up and say, okay, I've cured racism, we're done, everything's fine. It's another thing to continually engage with the community, continually atone, and try to make right what you have made wrong for so many years. And so that's the everyday personal work of this program that we engage in. Every shareholder has a meeting with myself or someone from our team, with our dean and president, and we sit down and we discuss their wishes for the fund. We draft a letter of agreement in which they spell out everything they want to do, how they want the money dispersed. They list who their beneficiaries are. Oftentimes I meet with their beneficiaries so that when the time comes for the money to transfer over to them, there's already a relationship and a rapport there, and I don't have to cold call the family. So it's a very personal process where I get to know each family member quite intimately over time within reason. Some family members are like, I'll just sign the dotted line and, call me when the check is deposited. I don't want anything to do with this relationship building. And we respect that as well. But for those who are willing, we extend our hand. And if they take it, we intend to walk alongside them and do all that we can to try to build a new relationship with the community. And then the last part of the program that we are currently actively working in is the grant portion. And we just awarded our first grant to an historically Black church, Episcopal church in South Carolina, whose priest is also a Black alumni of the seminary. And so with those three parts of our program, we have our hands quite full. We're a very small team, but as I mentioned, we have made 21 payments. We're working with 7 different families. We are collecting oral history interviews and documenting the history of their family and their work here at the institution. One thing that I want to make clear, we're not doing these families any favors. This is not life-changing money. We're not even discovering their family history for them. The Black Alexandria community is a very rich and strong and proud community that knows their history, that knows their stories. And so we're not coming in and saying, look what we found. We know this about your great such and such. They have already known that these individuals who worked here and who were demeaned here while working here were giants in their neighborhoods. And so I like to stress that because there's a misunderstanding sometimes when we talk about the oral history interviews that we're doing. We are not at all revealing anything to this community. So So far, that's where we are with the program. Again, this is new to us and to all of us, actually. And so we try to make our program flexible and capable of evolving. We're finding so far that the policies and our processes that we've been using have been effective, and we're getting relatively good feedback from the families. It's not easy work. It's very complicated. It's messy. It's heartbreaking sometimes, and it's extremely uncomfortable, but it's absolutely necessary. So there's just no excuse, as far as I'm concerned. And we just we tend to remind ourselves of our philosophy on those days and during those times when it is uncomfortable. And that philosophy is just to prioritize our primary intentions with the program, which are to build the relationship with the descendant community, help to shape a more accurate, holistic, and inclusive narrative of the seminary's history, and to hopefully take steps towards acknowledging the material consequences of the institution's role in slavery and segregation. We realize that there is no one right way to do this work. Every family and every single descendant within our program has their own expectations, opinions, and personal relationship with the history of this institution and with their ancestors who were enslaved here and or worked here during the Jim Crow era. At its core, through our program, the motivation of our work is to simply take the opportunity to try and right a wrong, to atone, and then sit back and respect the outcome, whatever it may be. We don't want to force this program on anyone who is not willing or who is skeptical or thinks that this is too little too late. They are well within their right to feel that way, and the door will always be open. But this is an obligation that the seminary feels that they have, and we are stepping up to the plate and hoping for the best. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kate Garvey. I'm the director of the Department of Community and Human Services in the city of Alexandria, and I too feel so fortunate to be part of this this panel presentation and listening to the remarkable work that's currently being done in this city and in another favorite city of mine in Evanston. In what I'm going to talk about today is Alexandria's efforts to implement a guaranteed income pilot. In Alexandria, we're calling our pilot Alexandria's Reoccurring Income for Social Equity, ARISE. And we are really excited about this project, which is not fully implemented. So I'm going to be talking to you about why we're doing this and where we are within the process. And I'm not sure if someone else is doing the slides or if I am. Because they're not moving, I apologize. Is someone else able to move the slides? Because they're not moving for me. My apologies. Yeah, they're not going forward. Okay, and I will try again. Pardon me. Okay. All right. So first, I just want to talk, and this is probably preaching to the choir, but what is a guaranteed income? A guaranteed income is a monthly cash payment that actually goes directly to individuals. That can either be through a direct deposit or something that's loaded on a card or through some other mechanism. One of the most powerful elements of a guaranteed income is that it is unconditional. What I'll talk about throughout my presentation is about challenging the policies and the approaches that we've used in the past within the public sector and what we need to learn about what's effective public policy and also what is public policy that is controlling and trying to manipulate or change people's behavior. With a guaranteed income, we are not requesting any documentation. We're not requesting any hoops to be jumped through or no work expectation. It's funding that's given directly to individuals and families. An important component is an understanding that a guaranteed income is a supplemental. It is not a replacement for social safety net programs where eligibility is required and documentation is required. A guaranteed income typically is not enough funding for a family, a low-income family, to sustain themselves. Another critical element of a guaranteed income is the flexibility, that it is something that families and individuals choose how they spend their money. What we have learned in so many different ways through, remarkable models, original models through Stockton and others, that individuals and families know what they need and how to spend money. And families do not need others to tell them what is good to spend money on or not. And families are able to respond directly to either the crises they have or the goals they're trying to meet, or just plain and simply what they would like to spend their money on. We also do see guaranteed income as an equity tool, as an ability to really address some of the critical inequities that exist throughout our community. Why did we decide to do a guaranteed income pilot here? When we look at Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with us, but clearly, when we have a median household income of $129,000, and this has increased, significantly, double digits since 18, barring, COVID, that this is a wealthy community. However, our poverty rate has stagnated. And again, this is something we see nationally that I know so many of you are addressing in your work daily. This is a tale of two cities within Alexandria, those who have tremendous resources and others who really struggle routinely, many of whom are working every single day. And certainly Alexandrians of color are overrepresented in our homeless data, those who are living in poverty and those who are surviving in low-paying jobs. Across our city, the pandemic just shone the greatest light on the inequities and the disproportionate impact on the communities of color in our city, where we saw over and over again how disparate the lives are within our city. We see that a guaranteed income is a way to address where economic mobility has been stifled and where so many of the socioeconomic elements are unequal. As I talked about in the prior slide, it really is about giving choice for people to do what's in their economic best interest, not what a public policy decision that has determined how people should spend their money, when people should spend their money, and how they need to demonstrate whether or not they are worthy or eligible for it. We also, foundationally for us and within the core of our department, really understanding the core principles that help individuals move from poverty to economic mobility and prosperity. What are the things that people need? Of course, economic success, have power and autonomy. So few people who have low income typically have autonomy in relation to their financial choices, and really profoundly is being valued in the community. Something we talk about within our department so often is that the people who we serve more than 26,000 residents annually, that the people who need our services are not less than, are not drags on the community. They are contributing to the economics of the community, are serving within their church, our husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, leaders, and the only difference is a financial challenge or mental health challenge or something else at this time. Not that defines the individual or the family, but this is the circumstances with which they're facing, and this is a tool that we feel is critical for their advancement. In terms of where we are with implementation, I'm just blown away by the work, that was described prior. We're still in the sausage making in some elements of this, but the American Rescue Plan, it was the key for us to be able to implement this project. As I said, going through the pandemic, we've really learned so many great lessons, particularly with one project that we launched using CARES dollars, which was our grocery gift card program, where we were able to distribute with our community foundation and many trusted partners across our city to individuals a grocery gift card, $400 per month for families. And what a significant impact this had on families. And we recognize having that kind of a buffer, what could be possible. We had to keep it limited to grocery gift card at that time because it needed to be seen as not an income and not impacting people's social services benefits. So I'll talk a little bit more of the next phase, but we will be doing a research component. We feel this is really important to us. It isn't just the impact that we're going to have on the 150 families plus who will get the cash payments, but it's also an opportunity for us to take a look at our systems and the failings within our systems that we know negatively impact individuals who are attempting to build wealth, who are attempting to build a greater economic prosperity. So we will be doing research that will tell us both about why, how are people successful, what are the good outcomes, also what do we need to do differently in how we deliver service. We do feel that we will be gathering information that's going to be helpful actually across our department. So in terms of structure, these will be $500 payments and we are hoping it'll be more than 150 participants, and this will be provided over 2 years. We will also have, and the cohort will have supportive services. We would be providing benefits counseling and to talk about what the impact could be, as well as to have a comparison group so that we can see what the different impacts are for those who are in our traditional programs versus this program. Here are some, again, within our sausage making where things are. So we have been working, most of the work that we have been successful in within and across Alexandria, particularly through the pandemic, and actually through all of our work, is due to strong partnerships. And so we're very fortunate to have a tremendous nonprofit network across the city that we work very, very closely with, as well as the philanthropy partners and others. In this case, we, in addition to Ag for Alexandria, our community foundation, and the Brew Morris Foundation, a family foundation that's been very helpful to us, we've also been able to work with the national entities, Ideas 41 and Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, and both have been significant partners for us. One of the critical steps that we, and I referred to this a little bit earlier, was to get the commitment from our Virginia Department of Social Services that the cash payments would not negatively impact the TANF, Medicaid, or SNAP benefits of individuals, that we have the policy authority to designate those as not impacting those cases, as well as the Employment Commission has also stated that this is seen as a gift and not seen as impacting income. We have been carrying out a tremendous amount of community engagement. We've had really incredible community conversations with individuals who are interested in being in the pilot, people who think this is a terrible idea, others giving us feedback on the project and how this could work most effectively. And our team here, and I have to acknowledge Lisa Gilbert and Debbie Brown Anderson from my team, who've done a tremendous amount of research, talking to very generous partners out there, those other programs that currently exist, talking about lessons learned and how things should work. We are still needing to make a selection on how we will do the cash disbursement. We also, another thing that I'm really excited about is the establishment of what we're calling an economic mobility or prosperity advisory committee that will guide the specific project, but also taking a look at what does it take to really thrive and have developed wealth within the city of Alexandria. And so having representation from across our community, from the faith community, business community, nonprofits, and others, as well as impacted individuals, to really say, what do we need to do differently on all levels, on the public and private sector. Also, the selection of those who will participate is still working, and we're still working, hoping to be able to get a waiver for housing subsidy. What are we hoping will be different because of this project? And what do we base that on? Looking at some of the other projects. Certainly Stockton is emblematic of so much of what we would want to, what we aspire to carry out. But there are so many other projects across the country that are telling us that if we do this project correctly and if in a fulsome way based in the community and in a way that's reflective of our city and that is responsive to racial equity, we can anticipate increased economic prosperity for those who are participating, a greater stability, housing stability, food security, and a real buffer related to being able to deal with emergencies. We also anticipate that people's unemployment and underemployment will be decreased, where we've seen people able, while the narrative, the false myth is if you give people money, they're not going to work. It's just not true. This buffer, this funding can help people to be able to make different choices so they actually can move into higher level jobs and to be more fully employed. Profoundly, the reduction in depression, anxiety, and poor health outcomes. We know what worrying about money, about worrying about feeding our child or staying housed, what that does to individuals. And again, quite significantly, addressing debt. There's again individuals making choices that are in their best financial interest, paying down debt, really understanding the importance of investing in themselves and dealing with their debt. So those are the things that we're looking forward to, and I just appreciate the time to talk with you about this project.
My name is Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. And I am so delighted to be a part of this very important conversation this afternoon about what reparations would look like in support of local income households. I want to very quickly thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak today, including Theodore Daniels. I also want to give a shout out to Ms. Murray, who helped hold my hand so I could get involved in this conversation. And I got to give a shout out to Mayor Biss from Evanston, who I just came from Evanston visiting with Robin Ruth Simmons, and we kind of missed each other. And we'll be looking to see you in December, actually. I actually, during the course of the conversation, put Robin on the phone and let her listen to you as you were talking about the Evanston example, which I'll also be talking about very shortly. Again, I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation, and I know that in the interest of time, I'm going to try to speak very rapidly so there's time for questions and answers, and I do have a hard out at 4:15 because I've got another crucial thing that I must do. But I think it's important to do Reparations 101 for our audience, because we talk about reparations, and I'm not always clear people are clear about what reparations are. One thing we do know is reparations is surging, as I'll talk about it, and that's an excellent thing. That's an outstanding thing, particularly for someone like myself who worked on reparations all of my adult life. Reparations is simply repair. That's the easiest way to understand it. It is a repair for injury or harms inflicted on a party or parties or a group by another group, which results obviously in underdevelopment and various other things. Reparations is for, as it relates to African Americans, is for enslavement, but it is clear that we need to point out that it's beyond that, because a lot of people think it's only for enslavement, but it is beyond enslavement. It's for all of the living legacies of slavery, those things that derive from enslavement. For example, the Homestead Act, these racially exclusionary policies like the Homestead Act, where white folks, including large corporations, but also farmers, could get land. We did not get that land. The GI Bill fought in the wars, but white soldiers got money and resources. We did not. Federal Housing Authority built the suburbs. We were excluded. And then, of course, there was the Negro Removal Program of the 21st century, urban renewal, went through Black communities, destroyed them, and we got no compensation for that. And we can come down to redlining, the war on drugs. It is all of those things that are eligible for repair. Reparations there's a process involved, and I was listening to really the very exciting and very thrilling presentation from Virginia Theological Seminary, as well as the presentation on universal basic income. You begin with an acknowledgement. The party who inflicts the harm must acknowledge, then they must apologize, and then an apology without remedy is like idle. It is meaningless, really, in some ways. And so there then must be a remedy. And those remedies can take many forms. It can be in terms of direct payments, and very often people translate that into cash, but it can take many, many other forms. It's not necessarily have to be cash. In fact, there's no amount of money that can really compensate for the Holocaust of enslavement and all of the damages inflicted on people of African descent over these many, many years. So there can be direct benefits, but there can also be community benefits. And I want to stress that, community benefits. If you take Tulsa, for example, the example of the destruction of Black Wall Street or the Greenwood community, while we can identify some of the descendants, maybe 5 or 6 who are still alive. In fact, it's a crime that the state of Oklahoma, the city of Oklahoma City, allowed literally hundreds of people to pass away without their compensation. There are a few left. And of course, hopefully they will be compensated. But when you talk about Greenwood, it is much bigger than just the descendants. Of course, you want to repair them, but what about the community that was destroyed? The community that was, in fact, damaged, which is never ever recovered. And I say that because while we want to be able to compensate the descendants, in some instances we may not even be able to find descendants. What we do know is that there were communities that were destroyed. So, for example, in Alexandria, Virginia, and or the relationship of the Virginia Theological Seminary, while it is important to deal with those descendants, and that's admirable and great, there's also the community itself that could also could be restored in some way. And let me just quickly say, one of the fundamental things that's important, and it is being done and exemplified by what's going on by the program at Virginia Theological Seminary, is the party that inflicts the harm cannot define the benefit. In some instances, people say, oh yeah, we did it, and here's what we want to do for you. We want to give you scholarships, or we want to give you cash, or whatever. Well, cash may be benefit, it may be good, but the party that inflicts the injury cannot define the benefit. It cannot define the remedy. It must be defined and or accepted by the injured party. And you see that illustrated in the very outstanding program at the Virginia Theological Seminary. Each of the individuals are saying, this is how we want to see it. So I just wanted to quickly emphasize that as well. The other thing that becomes important is that reparations is not ordinary public policy. We're in a stage of racial reckoning, which is an extraordinary. I mean, there are so many good things that are helping to cleanse structural institutional racism from these United States of America for one of its original sins. And I say one because the other original sin is the dispossession of indigenous people in this country, and we must never, ever forget that. However, equity policy, which is great policy, we love equity policy. Equity, however, is to make sure that the equity lens is applied around disparities and so forth, so that now, henceforth, and forevermore, there will not be a replication of the kind of depravity and discrimination that occurred in the past. It does not account for that which has already been done. So equity is good, but it is not, in fact, reparations per se. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's good, and we should encourage it. And similarly, There are other universal basic income is an example. It's great policy. And by the way, I have to always say to people, universal basic income just didn't sort of like drop out of the sky. Universal basic income was one of the fundamental tenets advocated by Dr. Martin Luther King at the end of his life. His economic bill of rights included the concept of a guaranteed annual income. And so sometimes from among others who are out there advocating, I have to just remind people of that so that there's a clear legacy of what Dr. Martin Luther King was working on. Great program, Universal Basic Income. It's being tried in a number of cities, Newark, New Jersey. Our friend Mayor Ras Baraka is doing it. It's a number of cities around the country are trying universal basic income, and it is a great idea that needs to be implemented. I now want to quickly talk about the National African American Reparations Commission itself. The National African American Reparations Commission is an authoritative body, and I use the term authoritative because we have assembled people who have been working on this issue for many, many, many years, including NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which is our reparations legacy organization. And in that regard, we have a 10-point reparations program. That 10-point reparations program is actually mirrored after the CARICOM Reparations Commission's program. In other words, reparations is global in scope. And one of the most important developments is in 2013, the 15 nations of the Caribbean came together to declare that they were fighting for reparations for Native genocide, which is a very principled position, and African enslavement. They developed a 10-point reparations program and created a Caribbean Reparations Commission. We are kind of the parallel body to the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and we work in a very synergistic relationship with them. This 10-point program is designed to be a frame of reference so that people will come to see what reparations could look like nationally and indeed locally. If you go to the website ibw21.org, ibw21.org, you will find that 10-point reparations program. We have on the IBW website and the NARC reparations website the most extensive online reparations resource center in the world. NARC is also working on HR 40. HR 40, the bill that would create a commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. This is a new bill, first introduced in 1989 by Congressman John Conyers after the Japanese had received reparations under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. The original bill was a study bill. It was an organizing tool to educate people about reparations and to say, at least, can't we just study this issue? Because it was not necessarily popular. It certainly was not as popular as it is now. In 2015, the National African American Reparations Commission rewrote the current bill. And the current bill, which is being led by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, is not just a bill to study. It is really about not if reparations are due, but in what form they will take. That bill, the original bill never had more than 50 sponsors, not an indictment on it. It was an organizing tool. The current bill has now over 195 sponsors and something like 209 people, including those in the House of Representatives who are prepared to vote for it. What that means is we are on the brink of passing HR 40 or seeing it being enacted as an executive order. It is here, and that is an extraordinarily important development. The other thing is working on local reparations. And in that regard, oh my goodness, there are so many reparations initiatives developing all over the country. The most significant, however, is Evanston, Illinois. And I say Evanston, Illinois, because I'm proud that the National African American Reparations Commission, working with Alderman Robin Ruth Simmons, who now has created an organization called First Repair and is now a commissioner with the National African American Reparations Commission, was the visionary African American woman who just decided that indeed the only way to deal with the wealth gap, particularly in a city where there was segregation, people were leaving, property values were decreasing in the Black community, was to deal with a reparations program. Mayor Biscuit so admirably laid out, and he was a strong, dedicated supporter, and would not have been possible without his support and other allies who saw the wisdom of dealing with reparations in a major way. Evanston is a model which is being looked at all over the world because it is the place in a municipal setting where there is citywide allocations of reparations. And in that regard, I want to conclude my presentation by saying this. Evanston is important because reparations can be important in terms of helping to develop and improve the lives of low-income people. Now, all the people in Evanston who are in the cohort that will be receiving reparations payments, the payments that the mayor referred to, may not be low income. But what can occur is with those persons who are getting those payments, they can use them for a down payment. They can use them to repair their home. And therefore, they can increase the equity in their property. And we all know that in American society, wealth is largely rooted, particularly for low income and middle class and upper middle class people, in a house and in the equity that can accrue that begins to develop your wealth indicator. So I want to conclude by simply saying that reparations is alive and well. I have never ever seen reparations on fire like it is now. And so we are delighted that this body, this assembly of people, and this literacy conference is dealing with it, because this is no longer fiction. It's no longer fantasy. It's no longer a fringe issue. Everybody is talking about reparations. We want to make sure that reparations are really reparations, and that we do it in a way that is that meets the criteria, that meets the values, that meets the principles that we're talking about. But it's concrete. HR 40 is moving. And by the way, the state of California also has enacted a commission, bipartisan commission signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, where they are actually also doing an HR 40 type commission, and they will begin to talk about reparations proposals on the state level. So we have Evanston, and we also have California. But for me, Evanston, all roads lead to Evanston in terms of a concrete model that has inspired people from all over the world. So congratulations, Mayor Biss, and congratulations to Robin Rue Simmons and all of the stakeholders in Evanston that made this possible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Daniels, and all of our panelists. This is a really exciting discussion. We have some questions that we have already received from our presenters, and I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Daniels, with one question. How would reparations make a difference and have an impact on housing and wealth generation?
Well, I'll slow down and try to answer it more slowly. But again, I think that Evanston is a classic example of where there had been a devaluation of property values because of segregation in the community and the outmigration and a number of other things. And while these grants are small, and by the way, let me just disabuse people of that notion too. Some people say it's small, therefore it's not reparations, or it's housing, therefore it's a voucher and not reparations. What's happening in Evanston is reparations. But what the people are able to do with their grant is they can apply for a mortgage, or they can actually take the resources they have and they can improve their home. And again, we know that it is the equity in your home that really helps, is about the whole question of wealth generation. The second dimension of it is, at some point, who knows, in Evanston and other communities may decide to move even more broadly to talk about actually creating independent funds that can also do economic development for the entirety of the community. The mayor talked about education, for example. Education is one of the keys to wealth generation as well. And so I know that there's been some discussion in Evanston about, having education as one of the programs as well. And let me also say that I know that there's an emphasis on financial literacy as well. In fact, the week before we come to Evanston in December 9th through the 11th for a major program, the Association of Black or African American Real Estate Developers in the region are holding a major forum similar to this in terms of talking about the whole issue of financial literacy. But the key question is, investment in a home equals the ability to uplift people out of poverty and to generate greater wealth in our community.
All right, thank you. Mayor Biss, what would be the next steps that you see in your work on reparations? I think Dr. Daniels has pointed to some of those things, but could you talk about where you're headed?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Daniels sure did just mention a lot of that, and I just want to say how much I'm looking forward to getting a chance to meet you in person. You speak about Evanston as though you know it better than I do, which is really a testament to how much time you've spent supporting this effort, and it means the world to us. You know, as just like Dr. Daniels said, we have begun to take a bite out of this problem by focusing on the housing aspect. But I just, again, as Dr. Daniels said, I'm going to stop repeating that in a second, but one last time, as Dr. Daniels said, you don't achieve reparations by dictating to people what they need, telling them what they are required to accept, or diagnosing their problems for them. We're here to acknowledge the harm that we've done and make an effort to address that harm. And so there are different constituencies in our community who have different views. Some would say we need cash. Some would say we need to address the educational inequities in our community. Some would say, as was mentioned, financial literacy. Some would talk about healthcare. And so we've devised a 7-member reparations committee. It's got 3 elected officials on it, but also 4 community representatives on it. And they're going to sit down and look at those different priorities that come to them from the community and figure out how to put together the next steps of the program in a way that actually meets the demands that we're hearing from the people who were themselves harmed.
All right, thank you. Ms. Garvey, a question I have for you. How do you see the guaranteed income approach as having an impact on inequities? You've described to us the demographics of Alexandria, but could you speak about the way that the guaranteed income will specifically, the impact that you're hoping and expecting it to have on the inequities and the disparities?
Sure. In terms of those who will be eligible to participate, what we're looking at right now is that those who are at 50% of AMI, as well as looking at the HUD identified qualified census tracts, and in those tracts, and it is so remarkable throughout the pandemic. We were really closely mapping where we were providing the most services, the most supports, and it maps on exactly in certain parts of our city that, again, are disproportionately communities of color, both our immigrant community, African American, and Latinx community. So we feel strongly that this will benefit members of those communities. Again, also where we have high rates of underemployment and individuals who are receiving benefits, but again, who are working throughout. So we do feel strongly that in terms of who will be eligible and who will benefit from the program, we will start to examine what difference does the buffer make, and for the opportunities related to wealth development and other issues related to the very significant racial inequities that exist in our city, frankly.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to our audience questions in a moment. And so if you have a question, please submit it in the chat. I have a question for Ms. Davis, however, and that is, what impact has the program at BTS had on other universities and seminaries with a similar history of having profited from the labor or sale of enslaved individuals? I'm thinking particularly of local universities that profited from the sale of enslaved individuals.
A direct impact, we can't fully say, but in 2019, when the seminary announced the creation of the endowment fund within the Episcopal Church and its institutions, being its seminaries, its different dioceses, and then parishes and churches, it's been kind of just a rolling announcement ever since of different versions of an intent to begin researching and reckoning with their history related to slavery and the role that these different institutions played, and then not just doing the research, but then now that we know what we always knew, now what are we going to do about it? So there are different groups. There's one group, there's like a course called Sacred Ground, where it's an interracial group that sits and talks about race in the church, and the history of it, and then what it looks like today. There's I believe a church in Baltimore where the descendants of a slave owner who donated the land of the church, land that the church is now on, and the descendants of those enslaved by that same man, who are both members of the church, are sitting together and having conversations about what reconciliation looks like and what reparations looks like. Because again, as Dr. Daniel said, it can come in many forms. I stress that cash because, you can't go wrong with that, but you can that's just the beginning. I think it's a both and it's on the local and the national level, because no one's hands are clean. And so we've seen a continual rollout within the church and its institutions. And then we have been participants in other conversations with like Georgetown and what they're trying to do and the complications they're having in trying to do that. And it's, again, as a private small institution where the dean just says, let's do this, I didn't have any red tape to go through. So it's a lot easier for me to just say, hey, we dived in. But, in having conversations with other institutions like Georgetown and Princeton, we're seeing that their discussions are beginning, and there is a intention to move beyond discussion and research into actual action.
Thank you. So we're going to go then I have a question. Were we going to put that question on the screen, or should I just read it from the chat? All right. How do we get banks and corporations who currently have new objectives around racial inequity to come on board and support our new momentum? I'm not sure if that question is directed to any particular one of you, but who would like to address this? How do we get banks and corporations on board?
Well, I think that this is a target. I mean, not only do we get them on board, as far as the National African American Reparations Commission is concerned, we are urging locales to be involved in doing municipal reparations. We're also encouraging students and working with students on colleges and universities, and we really are looking at targeting corporations who have benefited from enslavement. There are some who have stepped forward to say they're willing to be helpful. One of the things that we're moving to do is create what we call a National Reparations Finance Authority, a finance authority which will be comprised of notable and credible leaders from all walks of life in the African American community to receive and be the repository of reparations from corporate entities and banking institutions and so forth who want to do so. We also, by the way, recommend, when we talk about certifying local reparations initiative, that they have such a authority in place. And in Evanston, they have moved to put together a local reparations finance authority, because what that means is the city can contribute to that fund, but it also means corporations and individuals can also enhance and build out the Repair Justice program by contributing as well. So that's the way at least we in the National African American Reparations Commission are approaching that very crucial part of the broad question of Repair Justice for corporations.
All right, thank you. And do any others of you want to address that same question about the role of banks and corporations? All right. Let me ask then a question about the bill HR 40. It wasn't mentioned, but where does it currently stand in Congress? That's Dr. Daniels again.
I guess when I am also the retired distinguished lecturer, and I always ask my students to listen very attentively. I was doing my rapid speak. I did cover that. Where it stands currently, it has more co-sponsors than ever at any other time in the history of our work on this bill, more than I ever would have dreamed, frankly. It now has I think as we speak today, 195 to 197 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. And I say that because I have the privilege of co-convening the HR 40 strategy group that on this coming Thursday we'll be meeting for the 67th time. We've been working on this for 67 weeks, working with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We also are looking at those persons who are saying, we may not co-sponsor, but we will vote for it when it hits the floor. It needs 118 votes. We're now up to about 111. We have an overwhelming number of people who are prepared to support it. The problem is, even if it passes the House of Representatives and we're pushing for a vote, it will not get through the Senate because of reasons that all of us now know in terms of the filibuster rule and so forth and so on. So the high likelihood is that we'll be approaching President Biden, who's already said that he is willing to support a study bill or a reparations initiative for an executive order. So we would look forward in the next 60 days or so to actually having a national commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. And that will be an incredibly powerful moment in the history of these United States of America.
Yes. Well, our time is up, but we want to express our appreciation to each of our presenters. This has been an outstanding panel. Thank you, Mayor Biss. Thank you, Ms. Davis, Ms. Harvey, Dr. Daniels. And we look forward to keeping track of how the impact on disparities and injustices is going to be sustained through these wonderful initiatives and programs and efforts. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your fine presentations this afternoon.
Thank you.